Daniel Muir had never craved the spotlight. A devoted husband and father, his world revolved around his family and his simple job as a mechanic. As long as he could put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, and see his wife and children happy, he had everything he needed. Fame, attention, those were things he neither wanted nor needed. But fate had a different plan. It was past midnight when Daniel finally packed up his tools and left the garage. The city was quiet, the roads nearly empty. As he drove, his mind drifted to the warmth of home, to Maria and the kids, already asleep. He was tired, but the thought of waking up to their laughter made every long workday worth it. Then, out of nowhere, a car sped past him, its tires screeching. Daniel barely had time to react before it swerved violently, lost control, and slammed into a lamppost with a deafening crash. The impact was brutal, the hood crumpled like paper, smoke and sparks erupting from the wreckage. His heart pounded. Instinct took over. He pulled over, jumped out, and ran toward the mangled car. As he got closer, the acrid smell of gasoline filled his nostrils. A fire was starting near the engine. Peering inside, he saw a young man slumped over the wheel, unconscious. Blood trickled down his forehead. "Hey! Can you hear me?" Daniel shouted, yanking at the door handle. It was stuck. The flames crackled, creeping toward the cabin. He had seconds, maybe less. Bracing himself, he pulled with everything he had. The door groaned, then finally gave way. He reached in, unbuckled the man's seatbelt, and hoisted him out just as the fire surged. They hit the ground just as a loud boom tore through the night. The car exploded in a fiery blast. Daniel shielded the young man's body as burning debris flew around them. Moments later, sirens wailed in the distance. He could hear them getting closer, but he didn't wait. He had done what he could. He wasn't looking for thanks, just for the young man to survive. So, as the flashing lights approached, he slipped away, unnoticed. The next morning, the storm begins. Daniel thought that was the end of it. But when he turned on the morning news, his stomach dropped. Governor's son survives fiery crash. Unknown hero saves his life. His hands tightened around his coffee mug. Governor's son? His wife, Maria, turned to him, eyes wide. "Daniel, you saved the governor's son?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "I didn't know. I just saw someone who needed help." Maria's expression softened. "You have to let them know it was you." "No," he shook his head firmly. "I don't want that kind of attention." Maria opened her mouth to protest, but stopped when the news continued. Reporters swarmed the hospital, eager to find out who had pulled the governor's son from the wreckage. The governor himself had issued a public plea, asking the anonymous hero to come forward so he could thank him personally. Daniel sighed. They'll forget about it in a few days. He was wrong. The reporters were relentless. They combed through security footage from nearby businesses, tracked down witnesses, and even questioned gas station clerks along the route. By midday, they had something, a grainy video from a street camera showing a car parked near the crash. The license plate was traced, and before Daniel could fully grasp what was happening, journalists were knocking on his door. By evening, they were camping outside. It was a nightmare. Every time he peeked through the curtains, he saw cameras flashing, microphones in the air, reporters whispering into their phones. The once quiet street in front of his home had turned into a media circus. His phone rang endlessly, news stations, government officials, random strangers wanting interviews. Maria paced anxiously. "Daniel, they won't go away until you say something." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "What do they expect me to say? That I did what any decent person would do?" His 5-year-old son, Liam, clutched his teddy bear, eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, why are those people outside?" Daniel's chest tightened. He had to put an end to this. That night, he stepped outside. The moment he did, the reporters swarmed forward, cameras flashing like lightning. "Sir, are you the man who saved the governor's son? How does it feel to be a hero? Why haven't you come forward until now?" Daniel raised a hand, silencing them. His voice was calm but firm. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who saw someone in danger and did what any decent person would do." "But the governor—" "I appreciate the governor's gratitude, but I don't want fame or recognition. I don't want interviews. I just want to live my life in peace." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some reporters looked disappointed, others intrigued. A journalist stepped forward. "Will you at least accept a reward?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't need money. I didn't do it for that." The reporters hesitated, realizing there was no story here, no grand speech, no dramatic confession, just a quiet man who wanted to go back to his normal life. After a few more questions, Daniel turned and went back inside, shutting the door behind him. The next morning, the media presence had dwindled, but a black SUV pulled up in front of the house. Daniel sighed, already knowing who it was. The governor himself stepped out. He was an older man with tired eyes, flanked by security personnel. He approached Daniel with an outstretched hand. "Mr. Muir," he said, "I just wanted to thank you in person." Daniel hesitated before shaking his hand. "I'm glad your son is okay, sir." The governor nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "He wouldn't be alive if it weren't for you. I understand that you don't want recognition, and I'll respect that. But please, let me offer you something, a token of gratitude." Daniel shook his head. "I don't need anything, Governor. Just knowing he's okay is enough." The governor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You're a good man, Mr. Muir. I won't trouble you any further." With that, he turned and left. It took a few more days, but eventually, the reporters lost interest. The world moved on. One evening, as Daniel sat at the dinner table, Maria reached across and squeezed his hand. "You did a good thing, Daniel. Even if you don't want recognition, you should be proud." He looked at his children, laughing as they told stories about their day. This was all the reward he would ever need. And for the first time in days, he felt at peace. What would you have done in Daniel's situation? Would you have embraced the recognition, or would you have avoided the spotlight like he did? Do you think people should be rewarded for acts of kindness, or should doing the right thing be enough? And finally, is fame a blessing or a burden? Let's discuss in the comments.